All right. Now it's section 3. Not a long section, but we're going to dive into this. Mark, this has to do with the time for acceptance of offers and counteroffers effective date. So
Yep.
jump on in.
So the main thing is to understand where the parties are and how quickly they can respond. Usually in a buyer's market, the buyer is trying to force the seller to accept something in a quick amount of time,
Yeah.
but the seller may be out of the country, could be on vacation. So what I recommend as a buyer's agent, pick up the phone, call the listing agent, hopefully they answer and say, hey, we're about to submit an offer. What time frame does your seller need? And if there is no need, then you can pick whatever you want as far as the time frame. Traditionally I've seen 48 hours. I think it just depends on the property, if it's a condo or a single family. But there's no black and white rule on this one. Like I said, the
Yeah.
best way to do it is just to communicate with the other agent and find something. But I understand in the field,
Yeah.
the real world, your buyer just found their dream home and they want to know immediately. But maybe try to do some due diligence. And if your buyers are super eager, that may convey to the selling side that they really, really want the property. And the sellers may take that as ammunition against the buyer. So
There you go. So you really have to get a sense of what's going on. In my estimation, sometimes if you give them too much time, the listing agent can go shop your offer for other offers if there's a competition around that. But as Mark said, too eager, they might say, "Hey, look, let's use this and come back." But just to be clear, this time for acceptance doesn't mean that the seller must respond within that time. It's not a deadline. You've got a deadline. They have to respond by this time, right?
correct. It's just an offer. And if the seller never accepts the offer, then in theory, this offer would expire at the termination time. Now, there is case law that says, let's say the seller, let's say you gave them 24 hours and they signed and sent it back to you on the 25th hour. The case law says as long as the parties are acting as if it was signed in a timely manner and are proceeding forward, then that provision will have been waived.
Right. So basically, if you're wanting it to expire and it's the 20, here's the thing, if you're wanting it to expire, just retract the offer, because anytime that you retract before it's communicated that it's accepted,
Correct.
it's no longer good, right?
Correct.
So there's also dialogue around to be held that even if it is afterwards, it's void. What's the difference between void and voidable?
So it's a legal thing. Voidable means it never existed, really.
Yeah.
Void means you have some legal argument to void out the contract, like incapacity or something like that.
So in this case, what I would just say is it doesn't mean that the seller on the 25th or the 2 days can't come back and say, hey, would you consider? They just can't force you after that expiration date.
Correct.
After it's expired. Okay, the milk's gone bad. All right. So that's really the most important thing to keep in mind. Now it does say here, if any, so this offer shall be deemed withdrawn and the deposit, if any, shall be returned to the buyer. Unless otherwise stated, time for acceptance of any counter offers shall be within 2 days after the day the counter offer is delivered. Mm-hmm. So what is that saying in particular? You put forward an offer, the seller counter offers.
I think they're guarding against if the counter offer form doesn't have an automatic expiration for the counter offer. So
it's not indefinite.
Correct.
It's the counter offer is going to sit there for 2 days.
Because I don't know if the FAR bar counter offer has, like I said, a line that says counter offer is this, and if not this, then 2 days is the default. So I think they're just trying to cover in the event the counter offer doesn't express how long the counter offer is valid for.
Yeah. So and understand the addendums and other things. They're assuming that unless written in this counteroffer, and we're down the road a little bit, unless it expressly states something different than the original contract, everything else in the original contract stands.
Correct.
All right.
And even though he said this is the smallest section, this is lines 48 and 49 to me are the most important lines in this entire contract. And that's because this determines what the effective date of the contract is. And every provision going forward ties back to the effective date.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so this version of the contract, and again, you're going to need to understand which contract you have, because it's going to say the effective date of the contract shall be the date when the last of the buyer and seller has signed or initialed, and here's the kicker, and delivered this offer or final counter offer. So basically, if you're the buyer, you submit an offer. If the seller doesn't make any modifications and signs it, do we have a contract?
No.
No. Why? Because they haven't delivered it back. So you have to make sure that it's delivered back, whether you're countering where a buyer's delivering back, or you submit an offer and the seller delivers back without any changes. And what I tell all the agents when I do these contracts is, it may sound redundant, but if you're the buyer's agent, let's say you submit an offer, it gets accepted as is, the listing agent sends it back to you at 5:01 p.m. via email.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say it's January 1, 5:01. Is that day 0, or is that day 1, or is tomorrow day 0 or day 1? So it's important to shoot an email, I call it a confirmation email, to the other agent saying, I've received the fully executed offer. I will consider the following date as the effective date. If you disagree for any reason, notify me immediately. So what you've done is, God forbid there's a lawsuit, judges usually just look for what makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have that verbiage, then sort of the burden shifts to the other side to say, why didn't you notify them immediately if you didn't think that was the effective date? Because when you're tying every other date, financing, inspections, WDOs, anything else to it, everything's going to go back to line 49. What is the effective date of the contract?
So, and this needs to be an email. Text messages are not admissible as if it were to come to court. It needs to be in writing, which means in email. So give us that verbiage one more time.
So I would, when you receive the contract back, you say, I have received the executed contract from your seller. I have the effective date as, then whatever date is. If for any reason this date is incorrect, notify me immediately. Otherwise, I'll presume that date's correct. And
so
then,
the best thing would be the following day.
right. And
All
then
right.
then which is, well, I mean, if it comes in at 8 o'clock in the morning, I mean, that's always been, and I don't think any contract has ever clarified whether the date of is day 0 or day 1.
Right.
So what I tell the agents is, once you've established the effective date, you should have a folder, especially if you're the buyer, and you should have every deadline written out on the folder or electronic folder, your calendar, however you do it. So it's not your responsibility to remind a buyer that their financing is due or that their inspections are due, but you will get blamed if they miss a deadline because they're going to say, well, you're the agent, you should have reminded me.
Yeah.
So if you have a calendar that sends out automatic emails, triggers, make sure you have all of your deadlines lined up in advance. Because like I said, if you have one closing, you could probably keep up with it. But once you have 10, 15, you're going to lose track.
Yeah. And gang, a big part of your job is project management. And you're either that or your transaction coordinator, but define the starting line. And that's the effective date. And know those dates because those must be adhered to. Okay? All right. So that's section 3. Way to go. You're hanging in there. How about we go to 4? We'll do that in the next video.